Tell me. What did you discuss? What were your topics of conversation based on these questions?
I can start.
Yeah.
In our group, I think we could have gone on for a couple of hours, so we had to limit ourselves to the first two questions about value, meaning, and belonging. And there was a broad feeling that both value and meaning has to do with the sense of being accepted by others, that being feeling that you have something to contribute with to others, there is a value both in those close relationships, typically it can be with your children, your partner, but also a big value in those more superficial, haphazard meetings. That can be, they don't need to be deep, but they give a great sense of belonging. And we talked a little bit about we also talked about physical activity as something that is important for our quality of life when things in the social relationships are bad. We talked, some of us talked about the issue of about faith, about having the deep conversations. It's important to meaning. And I think that should be enough from us.
That's plenty, yeah? That sounds good. Sounds like a good conversation. Somebody want to speak up from one of the other tables?
In our group, we thought about that we like doing something together. Why meet up and just chat? I think it might be a cultural difference also, that perhaps many, I don't know if it's men more than women, but in Norway we like doing things together. That gives a meaning, because then you have a purpose and a goal. And yes, to be seen, and also we thought of the elders that might move here and not knowing anyone, that it's good for them to use their talents. Like, how can we, hva heter det, å få brukt seg selv, ja, samme det. And also to create something that is greater than yourself, be part of a project.
So it's really worth remembering that, because activity is. So we have something in the UK called men's sheds. You have that in Norway? Men's sheds?
No.
No. Okay, men's sheds in fact it's an international association, and because for all the reasons that you're saying, men's shed is men like to kind of do things physically and make things, but they're incredible places of companionship and friendship, and they're a place where whilst the doing of things is taking place, the really important bit is the friendships are happening along the way, and they're the things that have the profound impact. And when you're thinking about how you create compassionate communities, thinking about what are the community activities that you can do that will benefit the community, this is really worth thinking about, okay, because we'll come on to that. It's another subject matter, we'll come on to that in a minute. And what about from the last group?
Well, we didn't get through all the points. About values, we talked about safety within the neighborhood, to feel safe in dialogue and conversations with your nearest neighbors, and also unknowns. If you meet someone, like you've seen the face, maybe a new neighbor, just talk to them.
Yeah.
we also talked about the language of love. It came from a man with faith, and faith is also a part of it, both religious and non-religious faith. Faith in love, faith in the good in people, and to trust your instincts about that there is good in basically all people. To find that, and that comes back to that difficult word, reciprocity. Reciprocity, yes. Feedback.
That's it.
To have to get feedback from and to give feedback at least. To find strength in the differences in the community.
Yeah.
And use humor as a communicator and as an equalizer. Yeah. Which I personally find very efficient when you talk to people.
Definitely.
If you get on the wrong foot, you use some kind of humor, and most people like to laugh.
Really important. Really important. The pro-social effect of humor.
And we also talked about the importance of social media during the pandemic. We had an example from Paul here, who has been sick and maybe had to hide a little more than people not so sick during the pandemic because of the risks, and how he used the social media to keep ahead with and in contact with his friends and colleagues. Ex-colleagues.
I think, with regards to social media, if we look at the quality of the content of social media, it's a barometer of our culture. And if there's something wrong there, it's not the social media that's the problem, it's our culture that's the problem, and that's the thing. It's just a symptom of our culture going wrong, and that's the thing we need to address. And lying at the heart of it is all the things that you're saying, is that all the things you've discussed, that sense of belonging, even that light social contact, about that connectedness, and how we do that is about figuring out how do we draw people together. And in particular, that you can definitely think about this from an environmental perspective, because who isn't concerned about the environment? Irrespective of anything else, that we're all concerned about the environment. We might not think it's so urgent, or we might think it's really urgent, but we're all concerned about it. So the question then is, well, okay, if we're all concerned about it, what is the positive action that we can take from a community perspective that draws people together to allow that to happen more? And it doesn't have to be done as a political movement. It can just be a completely social, community-based movement. We're all contributing to the environment. Anyway, you go on.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, go.
Well, I thought of this social media things and even SMS, like if that is taking the place of human touch, it's not good. Because I think even I'm looking at my bills and I see that I've used SMSs a lot, but calls no. and still I know that getting a call is even better to me than having this SMS, and you can easily disinterpret the SMS, but a call you can even hear the voice, and of course meeting personal is even better because you see the body language and you see everything. So I think it's a danger in this communication on the internet, because you don't get the whole thing.
You don't.
And also you need a
physical touch.
Yes.
You do, yeah.
And also hearing voices is
definitely.
not only in your head, but also.
Absolutely. The physicalness of the air movement that comes from talking with people, as well as all of that we are highly attuned to body language.
Yeah.
like people say, it's like 90% of our communication is body language. And you think about what's missed in when you use digital media for that. And there's nothing like getting together with people. But if we're isolated, if we're physically because of the pandemic, it's better to have some connection rather than none.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to have a look at this now. This is a talk by Robert Waldinger. He's the fourth lead of the study of adult development, the Harvard and Glueck studies of adult development that's been taking place in Harvard and Boston since 1938. They've been started with men, and they've just interviewed them every year and did various tests and stuff. And it's an ongoing study. It's the longest study of happiness in existence. And he gave a fantastic TED talk, and I really recommend looking it up on the internet. And this is a part of his TED talk.
So, this message that good, close relationships are good for our health and well-being, this is wisdom that's as old as the hills. Why is this so hard to get and so easy to ignore? Well, we're human. What we'd really like is a quick fix, something we can get that'll make our lives good and keep them that way. Relationships are messy and they're complicated, and the hard work of tending to family and friends, it's not sexy or glamorous. It's also lifelong. It never ends. The people in our 75-year study who were the happiest in retirement were the people who had actively worked to replace workmates with new playmates. Just like the millennials in that recent survey, many of our men, when they were starting out as young adults, really believed that fame and wealth and high achievement were what they needed to go after to have a good life. But over and over these 75 years, our study has shown that the people who fared the best were the people who leaned into relationships with family, with friends, with community. So what about you? Let's say you're 25, or you're 40, or you're 60. What might leaning into relationships even look like? Well, the possibilities are practically endless. It might be something as simple as replacing screen time with people time, or livening up a stale relationship by doing something new together, long walks or date nights, or reaching out to that family member who you haven't spoken to in years, because those all too common family feuds take a terrible toll on the people who hold the grudges. I'd like to close with a quote from Mark Twain. More than a century ago, he was looking back on his life, and he wrote this: "There isn't time, so brief is life, for bickerings, apologies, heartburnings, callings to account. There is only time for loving, and but an instant, so to speak, for that. The good life is built with good relationships." Thank you.
I think we discussed that. Okay, so if you're thinking about community building, if you're thinking about things that you can do in your community that is going to gather people together, what are you thinking about?
I was thinking about the physical environment is also important, because I live in Fagerstrand and we don't have a natural center. It's no places where people naturally meet, it's spread. It's like one grocery store there and something, and it's a few hundred meters, and another. We don't have any locations where it's natural to meet, like, and that's a problem. I think.
We're going to upset the order of our presentation a bit, but I don't mind about that. A good bit of chaos is good. One of the things that, what happens is when you're applying, when people apply for grants to do things, whether they're setting up children's play groups or social services. Somebody's here from social services, is that right? It doesn't matter. When you're making a grant application, what you do is you do a needs analysis. When you do a needs analysis, you're looking at what's absent. You're not looking at what's present, you're looking at what's absent. And a way of describing that is you're describing a map of misery. As we will come to examine, that quite often when you look at needs and you look at the map of misery, you apply a professional solution. And when you apply a professional solution, community falls apart. There is a very different way of looking at it, that you can look at treasure maps, and the treasure maps are where people gather. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of examples of this. I was really interested to hear yesterday about how Norway has dealt with the pandemic. It's been done a fantastic job, really fantastic. The number of deaths that you had is minimal.
Just one comment. I think our elderly who died during the pandemic and was lonely and didn't receive a hug the last months of their life, that's not very positive.
That's negative. But you had about 900 deaths, whereas in the UK we had a 20% increase in deaths. You know, your total death rate went down during the pandemic. In the UK, the total death rate went up by 20%. So normally we have about 450,000 people die a year in the UK, and that went up to something like 620. And the way that the impact of the pandemic has been catastrophic. It's going to take us at least a decade to recover, and our resilience as a society is severely affected. And in particular, one of the areas, you know, which is in part a policy direction, is been a reduction that local authorities have had their budgets cut, and in a whole variety of different directions, not just in social care, but in a number of different areas. And while the pandemic was going on, a colleague who lives in London, who lived near a local park, and the local council stopped having anything to do with looking after the park. They didn't have the money for it. So what they did is the residents got together and they formed a gardening group to look after the park. And so what would happen is on a Saturday morning, everyone would come together and they looked after the park. And of course, the way that they looked after the park was much, much better than the way that the council looked after the park. And not just that, is that they made friends. They met up every week, common interest, doing something physical, like you said, and actually, you know, they wanted the council to cut the grass at some point, and it took them 2 months to cut the grass, but nevertheless, what they were doing was much, much better. So what you had was the provision of a service into a community which destroyed community building. And that happens again and again and again. And you'll remember that slide I showed you. I can get it back quite easily. This slide. What happens is that when you apply services to communities, that web of connectedness falls apart. So that you can think that the key challenge for you is how do you find the things that people are interested in? How are you going to build your communities? And you know, the reason that I've got this slide up is to say you find this through figuring out where you find your sense of connectedness and belonging in your own life, and then figuring out where other people have that same sense of connectedness and belonging, and then looking for the places that happens. And you wouldn't necessarily, you might see a rundown park, and you see that park, if you look at the lens, using the lens of the map of misery, then you'll see it as a terrible place. But if you look at it as a treasure map, then what you're seeing is that park is an opportunity. It's an abundance of opportunity. It's a place where there's incredible potential. And so if you're thinking about community building and a treasure map, you're looking for things that you have. And I would ask, you know, that you may not, so Ivan was saying yesterday that the local council met in the school because there's not that many places for municipal activity. And I would see that as a treasure, not as something negative. Because you're using a facility that's present naturally in the community as part of the community. That's not a negative. You don't need a massive community building that is specifically for the council. We're using the Pentecostal church. This is a community treasure. We're using, you know, the incredible facilities here because it's a place that's available that it is definitely a community treasure, irrespective of the religious nature of the building. And so I would ask, what are the community treasures that you have?
Yes, but I am very aware of them, but I still think when you plan an area, you need to think about the physical environment, because I think that's also important, even if you have places where you can do things. I'm more talking about aerial planning.
So
But when you build a village, you should think about it.
town planning
Town planning, yes.
should include social infrastructure,
Yeah.
no question.
Yeah.
And
So-
look at the physical spaces that can be used in a social way.
Yeah.
And a really good way of doing this is participatory budgeting,
Mm.
because you can take a percentage of your total budget and allocate. I'm teaching my grandmother to suck eggs now because Ivan knows about this really well, but not that he's my grandmother. But anyway, you can take a percentage of whatever that is, and then you say, okay, this budget is going to be spent by the community, and get the community to decide how that money is spent. And if you do that, if you engage in that process, you have to engage in the process of building a conversation with the community, which is not just a one-off. You don't go, how do you want to spend the money, and you go away and spend the money. But how do you continue that conversation so that the community not only can figure out what to do with the money, but also engages in the upkeep of that. And and then you're looking at community spaces to see what you can do with them. And I ask you now, what are your spaces for your community treasures? This is a community treasure. What are the other spaces of community treasures that you've got? Where do people meet and gather, even in small groups? Talk to me.
School.
Schools. Outside school gate.
No, inside we don't have gates. Schools don't have gates.
Brilliant.
No. Especially now that the pandemic restrictions are gone, then you enter the physical building even when you go to fetch your child. And I want to mention something which gives me a strong sort of belonging, made it easier for me as an immigrant to Nesodden to feel a belonging, and that is through the Steiner School, where I have a child, which was built by volunteers back in the 80s, and where if you have children there, you have to show up at dugnad, we call it. It's the concept of everybody getting together to do a certain thing, typically to maintaining buildings and whatever. And there are lots of different activities involving the parents along with the children that creates those spaces that through the year gives you a feeling of being in a village of parents.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's one community treasure.
I think I live in Fagerstrand, been living there for a long time, and there's a lot of meeting spaces there, but there is no center.
And they're very spread out.
They're spread out, but there is a lot of meeting places, and with like Eivind said, the voluntary work is also present in, not in the same way as in a private school like Steiner, but in athletics, in music teaching, in karate, in the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. There is meeting points, and we have in Fagerstrand we had a football pub. We showed football matches, and there was a community there as well, a good one. I'm sorry that one.
So,
away.
where did the football club meet?
At the athletics field, at the football grounds. And there were teams, from first graders and all the way up to 12, 13 years old. And then because of Fagerstrand, the southern village is so small, so from the age of 14, the sports sort of dissolves a little bit. Kids starting in what's it called, secondary school, and then only the ones who are, going forward in the sports, they go to the northern part where the big athletics club is.
And are there clubhouses?
Yes, of course.
And have they got space in those clubhouses?
Oh yes, and in Fagerstrand it's open 24 hours if you have the key. If you want to, because in the basement there is a training. You can train with weights or there's mats for judo and karate and stuff like that. So kids can go in and out there.
Oh,
So it's open.
Yeah.
This island has a lot of animals, not only dogs, but also a lot of horses.
And you've got lots of horses, and you have people come and ride the horses.
Yes, a lot of adults and teenagers and kids has some connection with animals. Either they have a horse themselves or they have an agreement with being with animals a lot here, I think.
So more community treasures connected with animals, with spaces. Where else?
We have the voluntary central with the boss right
Yeah.
and a lot of areas for pensionists or for people at home daytime. You can learn languages in groups. Now it's a new thing every Friday. We started last week with the Nice Friday.
Nice Friday.
Fin fredag, and it's open from 1 to 3, and there will be some entertainment and coffee, chatting is possible.
Yeah. Free food.
Free food. Yeah.
And where does that take place?
At our area, this Frivilligsentralen, we are in the center of Nesodden, the shop center, when we are in the top of that center. so we are near to a lot of people.
So is it a community hall? Is it owned by the community, or who's it owned by?
We got our money from the community and the government.
And you rent the place. And you rent the place.
You rent the place.
We rent the place.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's another community treasure.
Yeah.
There's the people at the back.
I mentioned out there in the forest, marked routes, marked paths have become very, very useful and important during the pandemic. People went out there in the forest and never been out there before. They just discovered new things and they catch up. And I think that's very important.
And are there like picnic places or meeting places out there where people can gather? Amazing. Full of treasures. Go on.
Yeah, you have the Bellhus, the Bell House as a small community in the community and for a local neighborhood where people in the local neighborhood could meet, doing things together, etc. It was much more before. Now it's kind of less of them, but that's a good place. For
And why is it less?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's people are. It's based on Dugnad. Many of these they was built on Dugnad, founding by the local communities. But now people are very busy and they don't want to use their time so much on the common area, etc., etc. I think it's kind of people have, of course, a lot to do or prioritize their time in another way. So then you don't have so many each
Enthusiasts.
So it's based on a kind of minimum of energy to put into let them going on and on and on.
These local organizations that this gentleman is talking about, the whole Nesodden, or most of Norway, was organized partly in this way. And they looked after the roads. The roads were privately owned and they had to be maintained. So all the people belonging to the road had to show up sometimes every year and do the physical work of keeping the roads working. And then they had a party at the same time.
Yeah, the
And
party.
that's what they still are doing. We have this party every summer, but it's sort of limited to that now. And many people buy their share. I mean, they pay their way after it. And I think that's one of the, I know you don't want to talk about problems, but Norway is very rich. And why are we so rich? Yes, because we have a very, very high percentage of people who are joining the workforce. And one of the highest percentages of women joining the workforce in the whole world, which means that we have actually objectively much less time left for community and other kinds of work. We are so busy. I can just mention 3 years ago, a group of friends and we rented 1 acre of land from a farmer. And we invited many of our friends to come and join in to grow vegetables in their free time. It's very, very hard. And I mean, I have very many friends who are into the green movement and so on, but they don't have time.
So I think that there's 2 things to be said about that. Well, is there 2 things? So one thing is that it's about priorities, and we have been led to believe, you know, and we've been talking about how wealthy Norway is and how that money has been used, and I would say that when you have a state intervention, which is for the best reason, that you want to look after your citizens, and you do lots of things for your citizens, that the act of community build, the act of doing things for the citizens destroys community. It does. It destroys relationships. It destroys people coming together. If you take the example of the roads, if people are not out repairing the road and it's done by the state, I'm not suggesting that we should repair the road. I'm saying, is this an example of how when the state shows up, the community disappears? And so when you're thinking about community building, what you're doing is that you're thinking about the opportunities for people to gather. The other aspect of that is that that we may think we understand about what's going to interest people, because what you're really looking at is how do you shift people's priorities. Now, you may love the idea of doing an organic garden, growing vegetables, but if it's not attractive to other people who are interested in green issues, they're not going to show up. So you may have a small number of people who really like what you're doing, but what are the other people interested in that will gather them together as a community? And then this then starts to move down the road of how you engage with communities. And part of it is about being focused on a conversation which is discovering about what the community wants to do. And the participatory budget is really useful for that. Part of it is about public engagement. And one of the things that we do is that we have the Compassionate City Charter. And the Compassionate City Charter is a structured way of moving through all of the places that we've already mentioned about the workplaces, educational institutions, churches and temples, or places of worship, whatever they are, and museums and galleries and the media, and that you gather together. So you could easily think that Nesodden, led by the council, would then say, right, we're going to become a compassionate community. We're going to become we call it compassionate city, but only in the context of citizens. You can say we're going to become a compassionate area. And then part of that is a public engagement program where you start to highlight the issues of doing things together. And at the same time, you do it hand in hand with this idea of having a conversation that's led from the community. So what they did in Frome, for example, was that the local council engaged in, the local council started going out to the community and having regular community conversations to try and understand and figure out what people like doing, and try and understand what's important to people. And then if they're doing it, along with the participatory budget, you then give the people the opportunity to not just have things done for them, but actually participate. The football club is a good example. The Frome Council, they're all independent. They started this thing called the Independents for Frome, where they don't belong to any political party and they can have diverse views, and they worked on their ways of being, which is all about how the manner in which you communicate, about respecting other people's views, about the quality of the conversation, about abiding by group decisions, etc., etc. Their ways of working, they're really good, and they realised that they were useless at sports. So what they did is that they gathered together a meeting of the football club, the cricket club, and the rugby club, and they went, okay, what is it we can do that will help you to improve your activities? And then the football club said, no, we haven't got anywhere to practice. And so a local farmer said, oh, don't worry about that, I've got a field you can practice on. So then they convert the field into, and then what happens is that you start to see this flourishing of activity that arises from the community, that the community have decided itself. And so I think it's about, if you've got an idea which gathers people, And it may only be small, that's great, but you definitely can't expect everyone to participate in that, even though you think they should and it's worthwhile. But the next thing is, okay, well, Nesodden's going to be a compassionate area and the local council's involved, and then you go, okay, we're now going to start this process of having conversations where we will gain this identity of togetherness and looking after each other and cooperation and coherence and care, and we'll have these community conversations to find out. You start making a list of all the different things that take place in the community, so that people can, I'm going to show you, people can then start to figure out what they like doing. Have we got a Wi-Fi here? Is our technical man?
Yes.
This one.
No, it's internet first.
This one.
Yes. And then.
Oh, you can type it in. Thank you.
Velkommen. Da.
Ja.
Kun det med stor bokstav.
Ja.
Right, that works. So one of the critical components. I'm going to totally upset our order. I don't mind that at all, because it's not some kind of. As long as we get to cover the subject matter, that's fine. Right, one of the critical components of around community building is about the gathering together of community information. And in Frim that we set up a resource directory of all the stuff that's going on in the community. So it doesn't matter, you know, whatever. It doesn't like, oh, let's look at befriending and isolation. Okay, so these are the, what you can see is that there are a whole variety of different stuff that's going on. Knit and chat, knitting groups, because we talked quite a lot about men sing, men shed, knit and chat. A friend of mine goes to one, and she calls it stitch and bitch.
we had at least a men's knitting group like that.
Perfect. And you're I think you're like, funny enough, if you think about, like, if I think about crafts, and I think about Norway, knitting is one of them, because you have fabulous jumpers, you stay warm. Also, wood fires. Your wood fires are brilliant, and your wood stools are brilliant. Anyway, so the Stitch and Bitch, community cafe, men's shed. Now they've got women's shed. Volunteer days at Wall Gardens. Grow with us, which is what you were talking about for those people who are interested in community allotments. You know, the list goes on and on and on.
We also have this second-hand store, and I'm voluntarily working in one of them, and there are people coming there once, twice a week to just. I think they're just there to communicate with
Yes.
us, and so that is very good. And and we have, I think, 3 of them. Well, at least 2, and one is also a Ressurscafé. Yeah, so that is really good points, and we have people coming there and sitting for a whole day, chatting. That is very good.
So what you're looking at now is the community treasures, the places where things happen, and you can see there are actually hundreds of groups. Now your population in Nesodden is around 20,000 or so. Well, Froome is 28,000. You're going to have hundreds of activities going on in your community. And how aware are you of all of these different groups, and what's your ability to access it? Okay, because you've got all this stuff going on, you know, like you're saying, oh, there's no central spaces for people to gather. Maybe you don't even need central spaces for people to gather. Maybe it's a series of small spaces where people can start doing stuff. Some of these groups have only a few people in the group, you know. And if you have this service directory, and you can see there's a whole variety of different things on here. Child families, eating disorders, family, parenting and young children. Like parent and toddler groups, they're really important, especially if they arise from the community. Like if you're thinking about the Steiner School, then it's not just the fact that it's a school, it's a community activity. And so you're thinking about, well, what are all the different ways that we can stimulate that? And there's another thing as well, because for when Jenny Hartnell was setting all of this up and she started to kind of get all the community groups, there were some people who said, I don't want to join a group, I'm not a group person, but I just want to chat with people. And so she said, she came across this idea, I know, I'm just going to start a talking cafe. And so, go on.
Might be about something else. Sorry. Because we don't have the service directory, and for the 20 years I've lived here, the central of voluntary, it was not her. We've been trying to create something like this, because you can't. You got Facebook groups, you know, and you might be lucky to know that you find one of these groups. So it's actually a job, might be a full-time job for someone in the county, because you have to know the numbers, you have to perhaps have a link. It's a job actually, and it's an important one.
So, for sure.
Yeah, service directory is like one full-time job.
Well, it doesn't have to be one person doing it. You can definitely do it through. So this is again, you know, if you go down the route of saying, "Oh, this has to be a job," you take away the opportunity for community building. I wonder.
I'm not so sure about that.
I wonder about is there, you know, if you thought about it a different way, could you construct this so that it was something that a group of people could keep in contact with?
I think it will be a job to create the website, and but every lag og foreninger, they have to do the work themselves.
But then if you think, well, social care could use this, healthcare could use this, and then you can see you start to build the links between different aspects of the. So healthcare, social care are treasures in your community. How could they join in this? Because when you start doing this, when you have this kind of thing, you start to see massive reduction in health and social care usage. Massive, unprecedented.
I'm participating in a study called, it used to be called training as medicine, and now it's called activity as medicine. It's in Oslo, one of the big hospitals. And they encouraged me to, what do you like to do so that you can go to this training? You know, if you buy a membership to a gym, you know how it's going to go. So I said, I like to bicycle where there's no cars. And they said, is there a club that do that in your community? And I don't know. So I found out, and there was a club. And I showed up, and I thought I was going to be the old man. I'm almost 60, so they're not going to, you know, they're going to just fly away and leave me behind. And I came there, and I was not the oldest, not by a long shot. And there was a community there as well. And so it's a little, you have to find out yourself also. But I'm all in for the idea that the council can, within the health and social part of it, can go in the breach to gather this information. We have your paper, Föreningsnytt, Community News, which has a lot of these ads for what you can do, you know, these groups you can join, all from yoga to cycling to weightlifting, whatever. And but there should be one place you can go to find everything, and that's, I think we have a job to do.
Absolutely.
Actually, there are several possibilities on the market. We have apps like Friskus, we have apps like Nyby, where we have talked about these apps for a number of years, and it's I think it's been a budget issue. It costs about 150 to 200,000 kroner to get it, and of course you have to be. It's not a thing that you just start with within culture or in health and so on. We have to do it together because it's about the community, and that's and I think now we have an opportunity in this year in the budget to get one of these apps and actually do something about it, because I think that's the way to go. I think it's very, very important to start with this now. I think we're ready, and so we just sitting here smiling and think, I think it's time to action. Yeah.
How much does it cost to rent a website? How much does a website cost?
No, a website doesn't cost anything.
Okay.
This is an app.
So what Stein is referring to is it's a web portal that is also available as an app on your mobile phone.
Yeah.
And the idea is that this web portal for a given community basically creates that sort of gathers that sort of information. But of course, I see there that this is on the webpage of the National Health Service in the UK. I guess that, so it's basically a web page. It would be interesting to know how, one thing is to create and make sure that it is, well, that most things are in, but then the big question is how to keep it alive. And I would be curious to know how they have done this here.
So the story behind this webpage is that Jenny knew she wanted to gather together all the community information because she had it written down on bits of paper. And she got a grant of £50,000 to put a webpage together, and she gathered the different groups of people, and they started having these discussions, and this went on for 6 months, and one weekend she thought, I'm sick to death of this. And so that weekend she created this webpage, more or less as it is now.
Did you get support from the NHS?
No, this is
You see the
outside the
logo up
NHS.
here.
It's a .org, it means it's just a charitable website.
Okay.
This webpage, the Health Connections Mendit now sell the template for about £1,000, and you can just start populating it.
I think there's a lot of platforms and opportunities to get this, but what's been looking at is also to combine all activities with the volunteers, all the volunteers, the work, so that you can actually get the society more together during activities and volunteers.
Yeah, for sure. And there's lots of volunteer stuff on this web page. You know, there's something called Active and in Touch, which is a group which is for it's a befriending scheme. And there you go. And they're like a volunteer, people who just go and visit other people who are lonely, you know, or support them or whatever.
Who updates the page, and who is that?
So
same woman or?
In this circumstance, it's kept by Health Connections Mendit, which is a community development service that is part of the medical practice. And so, if you wanted to do this, it'd be a question of drawing together the different partners, your health and social care and your community and your volunteers, and figuring out who's going to update it. But I'm going to tell you something else, which is a piece of magic which makes this really function. And then I think we need to stop for lunch. I'm happy to carry on, but if you guys want to stop for lunch, I don't mind. We do it in the old town.
Norwegian stomachs.
Yeah, I'm just nodding his head, so that means we have to stop for lunch. Okay, so right. Got a website. You've got talking cafes. Okay, the next question is how on earth do you get the community involved in all of this? Well, if you've got a website and you've got a talking cafe, why not just start running a short training for community members to become what we call community connectors? Maybe it takes half an hour or an hour. And it's about understanding about just conversations that happen in daily life, that those conversations, you can just connect people up with all the stuff that's going on, whether it's a talking cafe or web directory. Okay, so you make these community connectors, and you get people to start running this training, and maybe the training starts really small, maybe it starts with 10 people. And then the word spreads, and then you start to train more people. And we know that the community connectors have on average 20 conversations per year, just that arise naturally through talking to people about stuff that's going on in the community. 20 conversations a year. So far in Froome, over 700 people have been trained as community connectors. 20 conversations a year, 700 people, that's 14,000 compassionate conversations a year in a town of 28,000 people. It doesn't take long for everyone in the community to know about this. And this, unbelievably, is much more effective than any other method for getting information across. Face-to-face, the only thing that matches it is a COVID-19 virus, which is transferred by face-to-face information. And we've seen how effective that is. Well, we can use the same method of transmission. If you want to have a deep dive into your community, you do it through conversations. You do it through people talking to each other. And when you start thinking about who can be trained as a community connector, the answer is everyone. Everyone. Taxi drivers. Taxi drivers are a community treasure if you train them as community connectors. Hairdressers are a community treasure if you train them as community connectors. Drug and alcohol support workers, because of the contact they have with people who are suffering, who don't have that sense of belonging. Youth workers, social workers, policemen, supermarket staff, church congregations. If you want to build a web of connectedness, a web of belonging, a web of conversation, a web of relationships, you can do it through community connectors. And these are activated citizens. What you're doing with this is that you are using our biological imperative of compassion. You are naturally making best use of the treasure we have inside us as human beings, because all it takes is to create the space for that to happen, and it naturally happens. If you think about yourself, why are you here in the first place? You're here because you want to make things better. You want to be able to have a positive impact in the world around you. That's something that's present in all of us, whether we realise it or not, and the potential for that is present in everyone, and you can make best use of it. And the community connectors, you know, if you have the web directory and talking cafes, because many people are, one of the things about having a web-based thing is it excludes many people. So elderly people, for example, may not look at this at all. So what are the places where you can think about how you reach those people who are not connected by the internet, but connected by face-to-face communication? Right, this idea of of go for a walk with your neighbour is a brilliant idea, because you knock on your neighbour's door and you learn the name of your neighbour and you go for a walk, even if it's just once a month, because that's how you build connectedness. So you're talking about, you have a shop, you know, a vegetable shop, and they're a bit spaced apart. And do you know the name of the people in the vegetable shop?
Yeah.
You do?
Well, in one of them, the one I go to.
Just one of them? Okay.
Yeah, because that's the...
And what about the names of the people in the other shops that you go to?
Do you have a name tag?
No. No name tag. Would you know their names without a name tag?
We had two in Fagerstrand, and I go to one of them because
Okay.
I think it's the best.
You can see what I'm getting at. If you know people's name, if you don't know people's name, let's rephrase that. If you don't know the name of the people you're talking to, something's wrong. That web of connectedness is not there. If you know the name, if you don't know the name, ask them what the name is and introduce your name to them. Because you can bet your bottom dollar that the people who serve in the shops know the names of many of the people who go into them, and will call them by their name when they walk in. Well, it's so simple, that simple thing about increasing that sense of connectedness, that sense of community. So and you can think that, you know, the shopkeepers are a community treasure, because, so here's another story and then we'll stop for lunch. So I used to live near a small town called Bruton, about 4,000 people, and in this small town there's a health food shop, and it's down one end, it's kind of circular shaped, more or less, town, and it's down one end of the high street, and I'd seen this old lady walking to the health food shop, and she literally walked like this, you know, with her crutches, like this, and she walked from one end of the town to the other, and she had clearly lots of disease. She had big fat ankles, you know, heart disease, all that kind of stuff, and I thought, she goes down there quite often. So the next time I went into the shop, I said, do you, I bet you have a whole host of people who come in here, like particularly the elderly who come in and chat every day. And she went, oh yeah, of course that happens, you know, some friendly shops, lots of time chatting. And I said, oh, I bet some of them, their memory's not so good. And she went, yeah, no, obviously, you know, people suffer from dementia. And I said, do you keep their card numbers for them so that they can pay for their shopping in case they forget it? And she said, yeah, we do that. You know, sometimes we write it down, or sometimes we hang on to the card for them in case they forget it. That is a community treasure. That is community building. That is a sense of connectedness. And you can imagine that if you do that on an intentional level, if you say this is important, our sense of belonging and connectedness, if you start a public campaign of creating compassionate communities, and you do it using these tools available here that affect this absolutely profoundly. Okay, let's break for lunch.
Half an hour.
Whatever you like.
Yeah.
Okay.
Vi satser på en halvtime, så er vi tilbake 10:12, og lunsj er her ute.